Hello, BookTube, and welcome to BookTrek 2021. This is a 5-month mission that I'm on with a bunch of other booktubers where we are reading Star Trek fiction. And there's been a lot of Star Trek fiction, so we're breaking it down by iteration, by franchise. So first, we're doing Star Trek, the original series. That's been the whole month of August. I've been revisiting all of these old Star Trek novels that I read so hungrily and maybe so quickly or negligently. I've been finding a lot of hidden gems. I've been reading a lot more original series Star Trek fiction than I've been talking about. I'm making videos, but I'm also in the middle of the day when I want a palate cleanser between two other books. I will read another Star Trek novel. I have them all on the Star Trek data pad here. So I can dip in and out or just get caught up in all kinds of books. But I am trying for this month to read stuff I did not read extensively and love before. Stuff that I blew through before. And I've been concentrating a little bit unconsciously on the classic pocketbook paperbacks with the border of 3 lines and the number up on the corner. I've been reading a lot more of those than I have of anything else. I don't know why. There are plenty of other kinds of original series Star Trek to read. But I've been reading a lot of those. Maybe because I tended to read those very quickly at a gulp and not really think about them much. So it really does feel a little bit like fresh territory. And we've been talking in the course of August about the kinds of limitations that are placed on all of these books, right? Not only the kinds of limitations that are placed by the book, by the Bible of the series that grew in the telling. It grew as the movies and the TV series went on. The Bible that the studio hands you when you get the brief to write one of these books. Now, the brief is good because you know the money's there. It's not, no one's going to, this is not a usual freelance thing where you wonder if you're going to get paid. The studio will pay. And the book will sell. You know that already. You're right. You know a book that not only will you get paid for your 90,000 words, but you'll get reviewed. You'll get lots and lots of attention forever. Star Trek freelance writers who got a Star Trek gig knew that. They knew that that was going to happen, and those are all positives. The negative is that series Bible gets bigger and bigger until there's precious little that you can do in a Star Trek book if you have a limited amount of time, a limited amount of page, and maybe a limited amount of imagination. Maybe. The Bible, for instance, says you cannot change the ethical nature of any canonical character. Character is good, you can't make them bad. If they're bad, you can't make them good. Not permanently good. They can pretend to be good, but they have to turn out to be bad at the end. You can't kill a canonical character. You can't have, despite several early Star Trek novels, you can't have a canonical character go insane, for instance. Can't have them become a fanatic. There are limited circumstances in which you can have them be misunderstood. You can have them marry a villain. But you also can't, obviously, in your novel, you can't drastically change the nature of the continuity in a sanctioned Star Trek novel. You can't, if you're doing a Star Trek novel for, I don't know, February of the year 2000, you can't write a Star Trek novel in which the Klingons conquer the Federation. You can't do that. You can't do anything like that. And that starts to tighten a corset around these novels. Now, some of the really good novels that we've seen in the course of August, and there are plenty of others, some of them get around that just with creativity, with exploring the psychologies of the characters involved, the actual characters in the novels. There are all sorts of ways to get around that, and plenty of writers do. And then there are those who don't. We've seen that. We've seen a few examples of that. Like, for instance, the books that we just saw, the two novels by Greg Cox about Khan Noonien Singh, that do have a framing story set in the 5-year mission of the Enterprise, but the framing story isn't all that important. There aren't a whole lot of dramatic stakes involved. It involves exclusively characters that you know are going to be alive for 100 more years, so there's no real tension. And the main bulk of the story is Cox writing the fictional backstory of one character in one show. I don't think he does a particularly good job with the writing, but it is entertaining in the sense that you don't know what's going to happen. You know one thing that's going to happen. You know that the character of Khan is going to end up 300 years later on the Enterprise, but you don't know anything about his story. So it has a kind of dramatic twists and turns to it that, on a fundamental level, a lot of Star Trek novels don't have. A lot of Star Trek writers just give up on even trying for that and just write an episode. They just write an episode of the original show. which was essentially the same thing. I remember a long time ago, a commentator of original Star Trek, back when there wasn't anything else, when there were no movies, when there were no other shows, said that the weekly Star Trek, the original series on TV, was a comedy. And I was outraged, because I thought it was the most serious thing in the world. Of course, I was the first church of Star Trek. I said, there are comic moments, but this isn't a comedy. And my friend said, no, the whole point of a television comedy is that everything ends exactly the way it began. The status quo is maintained from beginning to end. It's disrupted, but everything goes, no one's going to die, no one's going to change. The thing ends up the same as it was. And that's a comedy. I rebelled against that. I guess I still do, but I do see a lot more element of that. That is essentially a true thing. It's a closed bottle type of thing. Some Star Trek writers get around that by inventing their own cast, inventing their own universe, do a split, so that the adventures of Kirk and crew are maybe mentioned in one paragraph, but they're not on scene. They're not on scene. They're not in the action. Some writers will do that and do a fairly good job of it. It's a little tricky because the reason we're here is because of that original bridge crew. I don't think even partisans of later iterations of Star Trek would argue with that. The only reason that any of us are here and talking about this is because of that original bridge crew. If they hadn't been so incredibly captivating, there wouldn't have been any movie. There wouldn't have been a spin-off Star Trek The Next Generation series trying really hard, sometimes too hard, to recapture the magic of that bridge crew. Or to act as if the assumption is that an Enterprise bridge crew will have magic. None of that would exist if it hadn't existed originally in that show on TV. So writing a spin-off novel in which none of those crew are there is tricky business at best. But for today, we are dealing with a novel that does just write a TV script. That's all that it is. I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. Some books, some original Star Trek novels can do that and be very good at it. My beloved Diane Carey, for instance, did a novel called The Great Starship Race that is basically a very high budget weekly Star Trek show. There are a bunch of these classic old pocket novels that do it really well. This one maybe not so much. This is by V.E. Mitchell, and it's Enemy Unseen. You can see from the iconography on the cover that we're in post Star Trek the Motion Picture time period, hence the pajamas that our characters are wearing. And it's very pro forma. The Enterprise has been assigned to escort a group of diplomats to a conference. And the wife of the lead diplomat is an old romantic entanglement of Kirk's, who clearly wants to revive things, even though her husband is on board the ship. There are peremptory, arrogant aliens who put all sorts of demands on our long-suffering crew. They are told right at the beginning by an admiral at Starfleet Command that there is an infiltrator, an enemy infiltrator in the ambassador's party. They're just told that, as a matter of fact. They're not told that in the sense of, okay, now that we know this for sure, now that we can absolutely confirm it, of course the mission is canceled and you must bring every single member of your guests to the brig until we can sort this out, like anyone would. Instead, they just do it. The mission must go on, even though we're telling you there's an enemy agent on board. And on top of all that, just to get the human exposition dump out of the way, Mr. Spock goes to a science conference at the beginning of the novel and doesn't show up until the end. So it's just the poor bumbling humans figuring things out on their own. It's you can easily picture. It even has the television kind of breaks where the action stops very artificially and then starts again because the commercial break has happened. It's okay in its way. There's not anything wrong with it. The Kirk characterization is fairly okay. It doesn't take into... It plays it very safe. This is a very safe Star Trek novel. It will, if you are hankering only to revisit your old friends, minus Mr. Spock, for another episode, then you'll get this. You'll like this, absolutely. And this will also put you in mind of those rumors, those Hollywood rumors I talked about from 50 years ago, 40 years ago. There were an idea gathered serious momentum at Paramount to make a series, a Star Trek TV series, starring William Shatner and DeForest Kelley and Leonard Nimoy starring the original crew in this refitted Enterprise out for new adventures every week. There was serious momentum behind that idea. I could easily picture that this story started as a script for one of those episodes. But you have to plan a long way ahead if you've got a show like that. But it never happened, and I'm not sure that's the origin of this book, but that you can definitely feel that definitely feels like what this is. There's nothing in here that's particularly interesting. The twists are things that you saw, 50 years ago in Journey to Babel. It's the twist in that episode where the Enterprise in the original series escorts a diplomatic delegation that has a spy on board, and has twists and turns. Those twists are basically in this book. It's not new ground, in other words, in any way. And also, just as a bit of disappointment here. I know that I said in this event that I would not revisit Star Trek novels that I have read a million times, that I love, that I can quote by heart, by favorite authors, good or bad. And one of the things this book doesn't do that I really wish it would do is something that one of those books that I won't be talking about does. The book that I'm talking about is The Prometheus Design by Sandra Marshak and Myrna Kalbreth. And it is a novel set firmly in the post-Star Trek the Motion Picture world. And it tries, however old fan fiction-y way, it tries to deal with the changes that we see in Star Trek the Motion Picture. It tries to deal with those changes. It's not just that the characters are older. Go and watch the original movie again. Kirk has a stick up his butt. He's overcompensating, as McCoy correctly diagnoses in that movie. Spock originally came on board acting like he didn't know any of his friends. And keep in mind, we were told that he went to Vulcan in order to undergo the Kolinar ritual, which would have purged him not only of all human emotions, but even of his memory of his time among humans. He was willing to do that. He was willing to just forget about his friendship with Kirk, with McCoy, with anybody. How does that make his humans friends feel when he's back on board the ship? No matter how human he is now. There's a lot of fallout, in other words, from that movie and from Gene Roddenberry's novel that ought to be in a novel that is clearly set in the time period immediately following that movie, and it's not here. So say what you want about the defects of the Prometheus Design by Sandra Marshak and Myrna Kalbreth, but at least they try to deal with that fallout in that novel. And so, for somebody who, I have an irrationally high bar for Star Trek fiction. I like it when it's really good. This doesn't really do that. This is more comfort food, which Vin at Revenant Reads has characterized all of Star Trek fiction. And when we started this event, he characterized it all as more or less comfort food. You're going to these things not because they're great science fiction, but because you see your old friends back again in action. I would say, I think Vin would probably agree that when Star Trek fiction is really good, it need not be comfort food. It can be a little better than that, but not in this case. Not in this case. I went to this hoping, because I've gone to some of these old numbered Star Trek novels before in August and found a lot more in them than I remembered. And that's always a very pleasant experience, but it didn't happen this time. So I've just got a couple of days left for this. So I don't know what's going to happen again. I've got a couple of ideas for what I want to do. Today is Sunday. So Monday and Tuesday are the last days of August. We've only got 2 more swings at the bat for Star Trek the Original Series for BookTrek 2021. I, of course, am hoping that our dauntless captain, Vin, revives BookTrek for 2022. And I'm kind of hoping that if he does, he throws a bone to us old Original Series fans. Maybe keep the Original Series as part of the iterations. Although, I don't know. There's a lot of ground to cover. A lot of ground. If we leave out, we're doing the Original Series, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise. That still leaves Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek Picard, Star Trek Short Treks, Star Trek Lower Decks, and Star Trek Brave New Worlds, if it actually happens, if it actually launches. And also Prodigy, Star Trek Prodigy. There are a lot more franchises. We can easily do half a year next year on franchises that we haven't covered. I guarantee you that by this time then, Lower Decks and maybe not Short Treks are these little short things that have driven some Paleolithic fans insane with rage. I have now watched them all, and I think by and large, aside from the one that very clearly plagiarizes another writer for the whole central idea, the tardigrade episode, those of you know what I'm talking about, was clearly, I mean, documentedly invented by someone else with no credit given whatsoever. That's bad. Very, very bad. That short trek ought to be removed from the roster and just junked. Even if there's no lawsuit, even if there's no public apology or attribution, it really reflects poorly on Paramount. They ought to just get rid of it, even though I'm sure it took a lot of work to make it what it is. But some of those short treks are wonderful, just wonderful, no matter how hokey they are. There's one with a very hokey premise where a young Mr. Spock and number one, the first officer of Captain Pike's Enterprise, are trapped in a turbo lift. And they can't be saved right away. They can't be transported out for some reason, so they have to talk. It's Mr. Spock's first day on the Enterprise, and I think it's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. The fans are an apoplectic about it. I think they hate that one more than any other, or maybe not. Maybe not. There's another one about tribbles, and there's a very clueless crew member in that episode, and a lot of Paleolithic, quasi neckbearded alt-right commentary channels on YouTube saw that episode and saw themselves being mocked in the form of that man. I always wanted to say, what's it say about you? If you're watching this episode and you're thinking, this clueless, misogynistic, resentful, pouting man baby, you think is you? What does that say about you? Never mind the episode. What does that say about you? But the main point about that episode with Tribbles, when it comes to that, I mainly felt sorry for the people who were outraged by it because it is so funny. It is so funny. It's just 10 minutes long, but it's hilarious. But anyway, I don't think that short treks have spawned any fiction. And we're going to be sticking, this is BookTube after all, we're going to be sticking with fiction. But by this time next year, I am sure that Lower Decks will have sparked some fiction. Maybe not. Maybe not. And who knows, there may be, Alan Dean Foster may have written the first Brave New Worlds novel. We'll see when we get there. I'm hoping. I can hope against hope. But in the meantime, we have 2 more days of BookTrek 2021 for the original Star Trek, and then we move on to the next generation. That is going to be such a thrill. Such a thrill. Because I know a lot of you, the next generation is your Star Trek. And you love it with a love that I have never mocked. Keep in mind, I have often in the last 5 years mocked the next generation. Often I have mocked it. But I've never mocked your love of it. Never. Obviously, since I was bitten with that love for the earlier show. I have experienced my share of mockery for that love, so I would never do that. But what I'm hoping in September, is there any chance that I will come to share that love? It's going to be fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. No pun intended. It's been great. It will still be great to explore Star Trek, the original series. But what I'm trying to say is this BookTrek 2021 event, it's got legs. Because there's so much more to explore. And the big thing for me in the next month is exploring the one Star Trek franchise pre-Kurtzman that I don't like. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up for now. But I'll be back tomorrow with more BookTrek. Thank you, BookTube.